I never had wolves act aggressive to me until that time, January 2012, when a pack of 20 wolves literally took after me out on the lake.
And what was that about? Why do you think they were taking after you?
It was a very unusual situation. First of all, there were 20 wolves in one place. That's unheard of up there. That's totally unheard of.
Joe Rogan is always coming up with some of the best content on the internet. And in one of his last podcasts, he chose to talk about one of my favorite subjects, wolves. So of course I had to come here and tell you about it.
The largest pack of wolves I've ever heard a count of that far north was 17 wolves, and that was back in the 1970s. Usually there's 5, 6 wolves in a pack up there. It's a real hungry country. It's hard for them to feed themselves if the pack gets bigger than that. They have to split up and go somewhere new. But I don't know what happened that year. I don't know if 2 packs combined. I don't know if the pack just grew to that size, but it was unheard of.
1. A man-eating wolf problem. Now this story is honestly my biggest nightmare come true. There's a pack of wolves terrorizing entire villages in northern India.
Wolves are unlikely to enter human settlements unless their habitat is encroached upon,
leaving people too scared to even sleep. This isn't some ancient folklore. It's happening right now in the state of Uttar Pradesh, and authorities have just managed to capture one of the beasts. But the hunt isn't over yet. If you know anything about India, you know that it's super common for people to sleep on mats or beds made from woven rope outside their homes, where it is cooler, especially in the summer. By doing this, they're basically offering themselves up as an open buffet for the wolves to feast on. So here's what's happening. Over the past 6 weeks, these wolves have attacked people in more than 30 villages, and tragically, 8 people, including 7 kids, have lost their lives. Just imagine how terrifying that must be. You're living your everyday life, and suddenly, a predator that's supposed to fear humans starts hunting you instead. The panic is out there, is real. Over 50,000 people across these villages are absolutely petrified, and who can blame them? More than 50 people have already survived attacks, which means these wolves aren't just randomly taking humans down, they're attacking consistently. So, what are the authorities doing to stop it? How did they catch the first predator? 2. The search begins. The forest department down here deployed this massive force, 150 officials and over 200 security personnel, to track these creatures down. This is a full-scale manhunt, or should I say wolf hunt. Obviously, they can't just smell these creatures out on their own. They need some tech support. So they got, drum roll, drones. But not just any drones. High-tech ones equipped with cameras and thermal imaging software. Imagine scouring the dark, eerie sugarcane fields at night, staring at a screen that's picking up heat signatures, knowing that at any moment, a predator might be lurking just out of sight. That's how they finally spotted the first bad guy. It was around 11 p.m. one night when a drone detected the animal, and from there, officials tracked it down using its footprints. Fast forward to the next morning at 10:45 a.m., and boom, they finally got him. The wolf was captured in the floodplain of Saiseya village, tranquilized, and taken to a zoo in Gorakhpur. But the story doesn't end here. The crazy thing is, officials believe this wolf is only 1/3 of the real problem. That's right, there are at least 2 more wolves still out there. If I were living in Uttar Pradesh, I would honestly just move. So how did this human-eating wolf nightmare begin anyway? It was the night of July 17th this year, when a 1-year-old was taken by a wolf, and that's what began a full chain of wolf nappings. The latest attack happened on August 26th, when a wolf actually entered a house, grabbed a 7-year-old boy from the courtyard, and took their lives. That's what makes this so terrifying. It's not just people getting caught out in the open. These wolves are bold enough to walk right into homes. The idea of peacefully dozing off under the stars, only to wake up to a wolf grabbing you or your child? Yeah, no thanks. And if you think the parents aren't putting up a fight, think again. One mother said that a wolf grabbed her son by the neck and tried to drag him away. She literally grabbed the wolf's legs and tried to pull it off her child. Can you even imagine what that woman must have gone through? Unfortunately, the wolf overpowered her and ran off with her son. The poor kid was found 200 meters away in a field, injured, but thank God he was alive. He survived, but that doesn't mean he's not traumatized. Now you're probably thinking, there's one big flaw in Rogan's story. Wolves aren't known to hunt humans for food. In fact, they're kind of shy, so they try to avoid human contact altogether. So what the heck is going on in India? 3. Since when do wolves eat humans? Let me just take a second to assure you that wolf attacks in India are rare. Sure, Sure, tiger and leopard attacks make the news from time to time, but wolves, not so much. But what turned these wolves into serial killers? According to this dude named Ajit Singh, the divisional forest officer overseeing the anti-wolf operation, a wolf can very much develop a taste for human flesh. After just one taste, it can become a man-eater. And with the monsoon season bringing heavy rains, the flooding may have pushed these animals closer to human settlements in search of food. That's why authorities are trying everything to keep them away. Loudspeakers, floodlights, and even elephant dung. Yeah, you heard what I said. They're burning elephant dung cakes because the smoke creates an illusion of elephants being nearby, and wolves apparently want nothing to do with areas where big animals roam. The people of Bahraich district are still living in fear. Until the remaining wolves are caught, their lives are all at stake. Now, while I hope these guys all make it out of their predicament alive, I also need to get on with my video. This isn't the only instance of wolves gone rogue. This has been a historical problem. And up next, I've got some really crazy wolf attacks for the ages. Fourth World War I, Wolf Feast. It's the winter of 1914. The First World War has begun, and soldiers all over the world are huddled in frozen trenches. Life is already a huge disaster. But as the war rages on, something unexpected starts happening. The people waiting for their husbands and dads back home start getting these bizarre reports from the front lines. Soldiers aren't just falling to bullets and bombs, they're disappearing into the night, and the culprit, you guessed it, wolves. Between the Germans and the Russians, you had a stretch of battlefield extending from the Baltic Sea in the north all the way down to the Black Sea in the south during this World War. In the middle of all that chaos, the natural world was suffering just as much as the humans. The European buffalo was practically wiped out, and the wolves, well, they were starving. You took away their food, and as nature often does, it found a brutal solution. At first, lone soldiers went missing. Then, entire squads started getting attacked. Imagine that. You're already fighting one of the worst wars in history, and now, in the middle of night, a pack of ravenous wolves descends on your camp. And I'm not talking about a couple of stray wolves picking off stragglers. Oh no, I'm talking about enormous packs, so desperate for food that they were overwhelming groups of armed and trained soldiers before they even had a chance to react. Why didn't they use their modern weapons, you must be thinking? Well, those things were not as effective as you'd think. Sure, a rifle works great when you're dealing with a single charging enemy, but when dozens of wolves are coming at you in a frenzy, there's only so much you can do before you're overrun. The wolves were so relentless that they actually forced the Germans and Russians, two armies that had been trying to wipe each other out for years, to put aside their differences. That's right, they literally declared a temporary truce because of this unforeseen third participant. There's leaders meeting and having conferences where they're all saying the same thing. We have got to do something about these darn wolves. Regional officers met up and arranged joint hunting parties to take care of the problem. And over the next few months, they did just that. Hundreds of wolves were tracked and euthanized, their numbers reduced to the point where they were no longer an existential threat to the soldiers. And once that was done, well, the temporary truce ended, and the Russians and Germans went right back to the business of shooting each other. 5. Italian wolves go bon appetit. Now, if you thought that was bad, let me tell you about Italy in 1915. Same war, but an ever more horrifying reality. At this point, Italy was still sitting on the fence, trying to decide whether to join the war, and if so, which side would give them the better deal. But while the politicians were playing their game of diplomatic poker, nature decided to throw a catastrophic curveball their way. The Avezzano earthquake. This wasn't just some minor tremor, folks. This was a 6.7 magnitude earthquake that absolutely flattened villages in central Italy. Picture entire towns made of stone houses reduced to rubble in seconds. Around 30,000 people lost their lives outright. In many cases, entire families were buried alive, with no one left to dig them out. And to make it even worse, the earthquake struck in the worst of the winter, so anyone who survived the initial destruction was now facing freezing temperatures with no shelter, no supplies, and no way out. As if that wasn't bad enough, things were about to get even worse. With so many people suddenly gone, the animals left behind had to fend for themselves. And guess what? A whole lot of pet dogs figured out pretty quickly that human flesh was an available food source. Packs of once domesticated dogs turned wild, feasting on the bodies of their former owners. And if that wasn't horrifying enough, the wolves came next. Drawn by the scent of rotting bodies, massive packs of wolves descended from the mountains, digging through the rubble to uncover bodies and, in some cases, hunting down survivors. Imagine surviving an earthquake, managing to pull yourself from the wreckage, only to realize that you're being stalked by hungry predators that have suddenly figured out that humans are the easiest meal around. The rescue teams that eventually arrived had to fend off aggressive wolf packs just to reach the survivors. troopers. These were bold, fearless animals, following the rescue convoys, attacking aid workers, and waiting for any opportunity to strike. Even automobiles carrying supplies weren't safe from these attacks. Eventually, it got so bad that massive hunting parties had to be organized just to reclaim the area from the roaming wolves and feral dogs. Armed groups went out to wipe out as many of these predators as possible so the real rescue work could continue. Sixth, a hungry Parisian wolf pack. Up next, I'm telling you about the time an actual wolf pack terrorized Paris. Yeah, you heard me right. Not some tiny village out in the middle of nowhere, freaking Paris, in the 15th century. It all started in the winter of 1450, and let me tell you, it was a rough one. The cold was brutal, food was scarce, and even the wolves in the forests outside the city were starving. At first, they did what any desperate predators would do, started picking off livestock. But when that wasn't enough, well, they set their sights on something bigger, humans. Now, Paris had walls, meant to keep out invaders, but they weren't exactly in great shape. Crumbling, weak, full of gaps. Perfect entry points for a hungry wolf pack looking for a feast. And so, they became a pack of human-hunting monsters. They had a leader in everything, a particularly bold wolf the Parisians called Corteau. These beasts made their way into the city and started snatching people right off the streets. More than 40 people had been dragged away and devoured. Paris was in full-blown panic mode. The people had had enough. They came up with a plan to lure Corteau and his pack into the city center, right near Notre Dame. Once the wolves were surrounded, the citizens went full medieval on them. No guns, no fancy weapons, just stones, clubs, and pure rage. They stoned Corteau and his pack to their demise right there. That was the end of the Parisian wolf terror, for a while anyway. Wolves would occasionally pop up around the city after that, but by the 1800s, they were wiped out in the area. By 1920, France was officially wolf-free. Then, 200 years later, the wolves came back. In 2014, two were spotted just 40 miles from Paris. A little close for comfort, huh? Lucky for the city, they didn't seem to have vengeance in mind. 7. It's the 80s. Looks like the Indian wolf problem goes way back. In the 80s, butchers in the town would toss their waste into an open dump. It didn't take long for a pack of wolves to figure out that free food was waiting for them there. At first, they were just scavenging, picking at discarded meat and bones. But then, something changed. Maybe they ran out of butcher scraps. Maybe they just got curious. Either way, they moved on to something else, the bodies of the recently deceased. And after that, well, they started hunting the living. On February 15th, 1981, the wolves attacked a child in his own backyard. But this kid was tough. He fought back, and thankfully neighbors rushed in to help. Together, they managed to take down the wolf on the spot. I honestly thought that would be the end of it. Wolves usually learn to fear humans after something like that. Not these ones. They had developed a taste for something new, and they weren't going to stop. Over the next few months, 13 children were unalived. Another 13 were attacked and badly injured. The town was in absolute terror. Every time a child wandered too far from home, there was a chance they wouldn't come back. The people had no choice but to fight back. Over 6 months, they hunted the wolves down, picking them off one by one. The final showdown came when they finally cornered the pack's alpha male. This was the one leading the attacks, the one who had made the decision to turn from scavenger to hunter. He was shot and put down, putting an end to the nightmare. 8. A wolf gone bad. It's the early 1800s in Sweden. This story is about one singular wolf, one lone beast that terrorized an entire region and became a legend. This wolf wasn't just any wild predator. It had been raised by humans, hand-fed for years, before it finally broke away and returned to the wilderness. And that, my friend, was a serious problem. Unlike normal wolves, this one had no fear of people. It knew their scent, their habits, their weaknesses. It started its reign of terror on December 30th, 1820, in Geising. One attack, then another, and another. In just 3 months, this single wolf managed to attack 31 people. 12 of them never made it out alive. Imagine living in that town. You step outside, and there's a real possibility that a lone, cunning, fearless predator is watching you, waiting. It didn't hunt like a normal wolf. It didn't pick off livestock or go for easy prey. It was hunting humans. For weeks, hunters tried to track it, but the wolf was too smart. It evaded every trap, every attempt to take it down, until finally, on March 27th, 1821, they got it. The lone man-eater was put down, and just like that, the nightmare ended. 9. Wolves join World War II. The wolves must be a super political species because they took part in yet another world war. Once again, they got involved with Russia and Germany. For a few years now, these wolves had been part of the landscape, lurking in the forests, minding their own business, until one day, everything changed. Our story takes place in Kirov Oblast, USSR, during World War II. Before the war, the balance between humans and wolves was fairly stable. Hunters kept the population in check, and the wolves mostly stuck to their usual menu of wild animals and livestock. But when war came roaring in, that balance disappeared. With Hitler's forces storming through the Soviet Union, hunters were pulled from their land and sent to the front line. Their weapons also confiscated for the war effort. Meanwhile, food supplies dwindled as cattle were taken to feed the Red Army. The wolves, now without their usual prey and with fewer people around to keep them at bay, did what any desperate predator would do. They started moving into villages for some quick snacking. By 1944, things had reached a breaking point. Children began to vanish. One of the first reported cases involved a 13-year-old girl named Valentina Starikova, who was taken by a pack in September of that year. People were terrified, and for good reason. It took years to get the situation under control. When the war ended and the hunters returned, they did everything they could to drive the wolves back. But even their efforts weren't enough. Specialists from other regions had to be called in to put an end to the crisis. 10th finish him. This is Finland in the 1880s, where yet another wolf nightmare was playing out. In Turku, a small pack of 3 wolves had been lurking around the outskirts of town for a while without any trouble. But in 1880, they decided to change their hunting grounds, and that's when everything went downhill fast. It all started on January 15th, when a young boy, the son of a tailor named Carl William, was taken. At first, people might have thought it was a terrible, isolated incident, but then it kept happening. Over the next 2 years, a staggering 22 children were lost to these wolves. You can imagine the sheer panic in the town. The people of Turku weren't about to sit back and let this continue. Authorities brought in soldiers, and professional hunters were even hired from Russia to track down the culprits. It took 2 whole years, but in January 1882, the last of the 3 wolves was finally taken down. That's 3 for 3, 11. Modern Russia is wolf bait. Fast forward to modern times, and you might think we've outgrown these kinds of stories. Nope, Russia, it's your time to shine again. In Siberia, which we all know is one of the most remote and brutal environments on Earth, wolves are still a force to be reckoned with. The people who live there are tough. I mean, they have to be. They've built lives in a place where winter can last more than half the year, and where isolation is basically a survival skill. But even they weren't ready for what happened in 2012. No, the world did not end. In eastern Siberia's Sakha Republic, an area so massive it's bigger than Argentina, something absolutely wild occurred. A super pack of around 400 wolves suddenly descended upon the town of Verkhoyansk. Oh yeah, 400. It was like something out of a horror movie. The wolves, usually content to hunt the abundant rabbit population, had hit a major food crisis. That winter had been especially brutal, and a sudden die-off of rabbits meant the wolves were running on empty. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and the town of Verkhoyansk was right in their path. They started eating their way through the community. The situation got so bad that in 2013, Yegor Borisov, the head of the Sakha Republic, declared an all-out war on the wolves. Hunters were deployed in full force, and a massive culling operation took place. Eventually, after months of intense efforts, the town was safe again, but the sheer scale of the event left people shaken. Because if something like that could happen once, who's to say it won't happen again? 12. Oh, Canada. You guys need to know about this guy, Ben Cockram. He was about as rugged as they come, a Canadian trapper who made his living deep in the wilderness, braving the elements and whatever else nature decided to throw his way. In April of 1922, while working north of Fisher River on Lake Winnipeg, he found himself in a showdown that I absolutely need to talk about. Basically, this massive pack of wolves crossed his path, and these weren't the shy, skittish kind that usually slink away at the first sign of a human. No, these wolves were hungry, bold, and ready for a fight. But so was he. Cockram, being the tough-as-nails outdoorsman he was, didn't go down without giving them one heck of a battle. With his rifle, he took down 7 of the wolves before resorting to his club to fend off another 4. 11 wolves gone, but the pack still had the numbers. Overwhelmed, he eventually lost the fight, and by the time others found the scene, all that remained was evidence of one of the most intense man versus nature struggles in Canadian history. Alive or not, I think he was a real hero. 13. Radiation versus Chernobyl wolves. This one's less about man versus wolf, and more about wolf versus something much scarier, radiation. But, I mean, you could still argue that this radiation came about as a result of human intervention, so there's that. Back in April of 1986, Chernobyl became a ghost town overnight after one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. When Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded, it spewed out enough radiation to turn the surrounding area into an uninhabitable wasteland. Humans Humans fled, but nature stuck around and took over. Wolves, in particular, seem to be thriving in ways that have scientists scratching their heads. In the Chernobyl exclusion zone, there are reportedly 7 times more wolves than in nearby, non-contaminated nature reserves. And here's where things get weird. Tests on their bones show radiation levels so high that their remains have to be handled as nuclear waste. That's right, these wolves are basically walking Geiger counters. Scientists who study them have to wear special radiation suits just to get close. Yet, despite all the radiation exposure, these wolves don't seem to be suffering, like at all. Instead, their numbers are booming. Is it because they've adapted? Is it just the lack of human interference? Nobody's really sure, and that's all from me for now. Which wolf incident freaked you out the most? Let me know. I hope you enjoyed today's video, because I sure did. Stay tuned for more content just like this.